Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's Better on Draft.
Welcome, everybody. Episode 309 of the Better on Draft podcast. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. This is the final episode of the year. We will see you next year with another great year of interviews, including our Michigan series, which we start off next week with Ellison Brewing, in which we'll be discussing their NA beers. But for tonight, we have a special guest, someone that we've worked with a lot within the industry. But let's go around, find all of the hosts, see what we're drinking, starting with Rob. Rob, what do you got over there?
Right now, pretty much sticking with the ginger ale and the Kentucky 74, the non-alcoholic bourbon spirit.
Wendy, what do you got over there?
Well, since I don't believe we've heard from them yet, I have the Mad Elf Grand Cru from Trogs. Just going to keep drinking it until they come on.
And Dan, what do you got?
All right. I'm going hard apparently tonight. Out of Broken Boundary, I've got a Carry Your Own Bags Porter. And then I've got a Firestone Walker 805 as well.
All right, for me, I have got a can of Misery Loves Company, the alt beer from the Missouri Brewers Guild, and I found a great beer over at Marino's Beverage Depot, which is a black cherry Mountain Dew zero sugar hard seltzer. So I am excited to try it. Our guest shaking his head. Well, let's bring him in. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Hi there, I'm Tristan Chan. I'm the founder of Porchdrinking.com, our national craft beer publication, writers all across the country. And I'm also the founder of the Porch Collective, which is a marketing consulting firm for breweries, distilleries, and cideries.
Awesome. Now, looking back at all of our episodes, it's very, very funny because if you look at our very first episode, and I'm talking episode 1 of the podcast, we bring up an article from Porchdrinking.com. So we've been following you guys for a bit. Dan was laughing because the website was named Porch Drinking. Was
I?
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, we actually brought this up way back then. That's kind of funny. Go ahead. Sorry.
So my question to you, how did you come up with the name Porch Drinking?
Yeah, I think back on some of my favorite memories of hanging out with friends, drinking beers, and usually those occurred on porches. And so when we started this website, we really wanted to come up with something that really captured the feeling of community, of sitting around shooting the shit with your friends and talking about everything from music, sports, and pop culture, all through the lens of craft beer. And so that's we felt like Porch Drinking really captured that spirit, and I feel like it's represented us pretty well.
What was the idea behind Porch Drinking? Was it always going to be just a news or like a op-ed type website? Like what did you foresee it to be when you first started?
Well, back in the day, there used to be this website called Grantland, it was kind of this really cool amalgam of things that really kind of talked about sports through the lens of music, pop culture, and I really wanted to capture that spirit. I wanted to mirror that in what we were doing. There were a lot of publications out there that were already rating beers or ranking beers, and we didn't want to just copy that verbatim. And so when we started Porch Drinking, the focus was always around this concept of storytelling with craft beer and making beer fun and approachable. And so, we mirrored that a little bit, and I think throughout the years, we've really retained that element. So, you'll see everything from pairing beers with Avengers characters to asking brewers what's on their brew day playlist. We love to mix in kind of relevant topics and pop culture references whenever possible. So back when Marie Kondo was the big hit, we talked about how to Marie Kondo your beer collection. And so we love bringing in what's relevant to everyday life and talking about beer in that, in that kind of pairing. So I think, throughout the years, we've also evolved what we've done. So, with my journalism background, I wanted to also represent kind of a journalistic element to the publication. And so we definitely have, throughout the years, built a reputation for breaking news stories and reporting what's happening within the industry. But, at the end of the day, we still really love keeping it fun, keeping it light, and bringing more people from all different backgrounds into this awesome community that is craft beer.
Do you guys get a lot of feedback, whether it's positive or negative, when you don't rate beer? Because what we see is a lot of people do still care about what we think of the beer, but for us personally, like, we don't like putting a number associated to the beer, especially because none of us are BJCP, none of us are, really like, we understand what a beer should taste like, but to be an orator of what that means really just goes way past, I think, what the four of us here can do.
No, I actually don't. I don't think we've gotten hardly any negative feedback from the fact that we don't rate beers. In fact, we intentionally, we launched the website 10 years ago. We one of the things that I wanted to ensure was that every single day of the week, we would have a beer showcase to start the day. So that 8 a.m. slot was always dedicated to some specific beer showcase. And what that meant was that, we could still talk about the beer and talk about its, taste and aroma and all kind of tasting notes related to the beer. But we also wanted to weave in some storytelling and talk about, how beer got its name, or maybe what inspired the creation of this beer, or, what we felt, at the beginning, when it was more kind of, talking about personal relationships and personal, relations to the beer. We would sometimes talk about what a beer, how it related to a specific meaning or a specific time in our lives. So we wanted to bring something more than just like, what a lot of the websites were doing out there in terms of like SRMs and, IBUs, and just like kind of data driven analysis of beers, and really make it more relatable. And I think a lot of breweries respect that. And, a lot of readers respect that, because not every single person who's interested in beer is going to be someone who wants to be a BJCP judge or wants to geek out on all the, scientific elements of beer. Because at the end of the day, beer is still meant to be fun. And so I think we bring kind of a balance to the table of saying, like, sure, you can nerd out and read some home brewing specific articles or industry related articles, or you can just enjoy your beer and talk about why you enjoy it and what makes it fun and entertaining. So
before I pass it over to Rob, my last question to you mentioned something that, beer is meant to be fun and beer is meant to be, drank, but within our industry, the fan base can get, for lack of better words, a lot toxic, extremely toxic, very rude, very, offensive, to be honest, just
Sure.
because there is, everyone has to have an opinion. We started a podcast, so I can't really use call them out for having an opinion. But when you're talking as a consultant to a lot of these breweries who are going to get hit on Yelp, Untapped, Facebook, Google, on all these sites about maybe a bad experience, how do you coach them to do something, to not necessarily fight back, but
but to help diffuse the situation a little bit.
Yeah. That's something that I'm always curious about, because even us here at Better on Draft, we'll get review bombed for having like our drinking while black episodes. And for me, it's hard to like fight against it, because you're just going to dig yourself a hole, especially if you feed the trolls, always in my mind. But how do you coach businesses who really have to be upfront to curtail that negativity?
Totally. Well, I mean, from my own personal policy, when it comes to someone who's, racist or sexist, those aren't the kind of people that we want to associate with or have involved in our community. Those are kind of non-starters of like, all right, if you're going to be a piece of crap, like, we don't need you a part of our community. Now, when it comes to community management, that side can be a little bit more tricky. And you know, a lot of the clients that I work with, I really talk through our values, my values particularly when it comes to working with them, and many of them share the same kind of perspective of, you know, if they're being racist or they're being sexist or they're being, you know, homophobic or anything like that, you know, we just delete the comment. We don't need that part of the narrative. Sometimes though, you know, my best philosophy when it comes to people who, you know, are ticky-tack about certain elements, like, I part of the services that I offer involves community management for social media, and I see some of the most insane comments out there. I think the best example was a brewery that I was working with changed the bottle format from a larger size format to a smaller size format. And when we made that change, one of their customers took it upon themselves to dissect the cost per ounce of every single beer that they had released previously, and went through and commented about, like, oh, why did you increase this amount by this amount? Because now your amount per ounce is yada, yada, yada. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, personally, my reaction is, how does this person have this much time on their hands? But, you know, obviously when you're working as a community manager, you can't really respond with what you personally want to say. And so, you know, we try to provide as much information and be as transparent as possible, while also killing them with kindness. And so, you know, typically when there are issues, we'll say, like, hey, like, sorry, we didn't like this particular beer. Might we suggest that you try this other one? If you'd like to come into the tap room, we'd love to buy you another beer to experience something different that might be more to your liking. Really, you know, we want to take people outside of being those keyboard warriors and bring them into the tasting room and actually interact with us on a personal level, because typically when you do that, you're not going to have the same kind of responses that you see from social media.
So I have a question about that then, because we have a brewery in Michigan that it just showed up on Pilsnerish, because they are responding to messages rather harshly. Now, some of them I was like, go for it. And others I was like, is that really the best way to respond? How do you respond when your clients want to do that?
You know, I think it depends. It all depends on your brand. You know, there are certain brands, I think, you know, was it Wendy's, like, nationally, who's known for being super snarky, and, you know, I think they still abide by certain values and are very aligned with, like, staying within these boundaries, within these guardrails. But, you know, when it comes to breweries, like, I generally am very careful of having those discussions beforehand. And so if there is a brewery that's saying, like, hey, we're gonna go after our customers if they're not, you know, if they're responding in a way that we don't like it, I'm generally not going to work with that kind of brewery, because I think that can be toxic to our industry. You know, if you're a brewery that is willing to go the distance in educating clients and providing thoughtful responses and trying to reason with consumers, then I think, you know, that's the first step. And if your consumers are just being trolls and not willing to be reasonable in their responses, then, hey, maybe that's when you stop pulling your punches and you know, actually show a little bit of sass and snark and some personality. And as long as it's, you know, I don't think the consumer is always right. I think that rule is a dated model, and I don't think that that's something that is applicable to today. And so I'm not afraid of, within reason, if you've gone through all the steps that you need to, and you try to be reasonable, then I have no problem with the brewery, you know, defending themselves in a thoughtful, reasonable way. But it sounds like what you're describing is generally not the kind of client that I would typically work with.
So we do have a couple of questions that have come through on our Facebook chat. Why are there so many different kinds of beers, and is there a beer for every season? That's from Justin Ecker.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah. Yep. Why
Sure.
are there so many different beers, and is there a beer for every season?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's definitely a beer for every season. And I think there's also a beer for every kind of taste profile. And I think that's what's so exciting about the craft beer industry is that, people always ask me what the difference is between beer and wine. And I say that, beer is, wine definitely has that nuance, right? It's a little bit more refined in the fact that not everyone's palates, including mine, can truly detect all the nuances of, certain wines. And so what I love about beer is that, especially American beer, is that we've been so creative in how we've taken this very historic, very traditional product and elevated it to the point where we can infuse different elements, tweak traditional recipes. We can still honor tradition with our very traditional methods, but we can also push the boundaries of what we understand of what beer can be and what it will become. And so I think, that note of why there's so many different beers out there is because, people love trying different things, and we love, having our palates be introduced to new flavor profiles and experiencing new flavor profiles. And so I think that's what makes beer so fun and exciting.
Agreed. My question now is, what are you drinking?
What am I drinking? Well, it's heading towards the end of the season, but Sierra Nevada's Celebration Fresh Hop IPA is one of my favorite beers for the tail end of the year. We recently had Terrence Sullivan, who is the brand director for Sierra Nevada, on our own podcast, and we had a chance to kind of talk to them about this historic beer, which is unbelievably 40 years old. And they really kind of were one of the first adopters of the and maybe even pioneers of the term fresh hop. And while it's different than I think what the definition of fresh hop beers are nowadays, it's, they still generally get the hops into their boil within 48 hours of harvesting, which I think is super cool on that scale. Now, I think I'm personally a bigger fan of West Coast IPAs versus East Coast IPAs. And so I love this clean, crisp, refreshing kind of element that still brings a lot of, hop bitterness while still finishing very clean.
So what is your favorite part of what you're doing here with Porchdrinking?
I think with Porchdrinking, I love that the fact that we still continue to give voices to small up and coming breweries. I think with over 9,000 breweries in the country, we've been able to abide by our own core values of, not covering breweries that are sexist, not covering breweries that are racist. We do have kind of not covering Anheuser-Busch owned breweries. We can really focus our attention on breweries that are doing it the right way, breweries that are trying to showcase innovation without having to do bad things to other breweries within the industry. And we're able to kind of give a voice to small independent businesses and sometimes see those grow and develop into, national players. Similarly, within our own kind of institution, we've been able to elevate the voices of writers that start out as contributors to our publication and have gone on to become the editor-in-chief of craftbeer.com. Over the past 10 years, Porchdrinking started very much as a passion project, and it still is to this day. And I think one of the cool things about that is that we are very much an independent publication. We can write about whatever we want. I don't have anyone that I'm beholden to, and I don't tell our writers, oh, you need to cover this because it's going to bring us this amount of clicks or page views or whatever. I don't provide any of those kind of guardrails. I say, if this is an important story, if this is a story that you care about, then by all means pursue it. And so I think it's given opportunities for writers who've grown up to become brewers and start their own breweries. And so, we've just given opportunities for people to follow their passion and grow within the craft beer industry.
That's awesome. And you mentioned Porchcast earlier. What is one of the interviews, and I'm sure there's plenty because we all have a lot of them. What is an interview that has stuck with you that you will think about every now and then and be like, that was pretty cool?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. Getting to talk to Charlie Papazian before he retired was pretty incredible. Going to the Brewers Association's offices and sitting down with him. We had Sam Calagione on the podcast, and he's always such a big personality and cool character and such a generous person. And then recently, last year, we had the honor of speaking with Chris Black, who is the co-founder of Falling Rock Tap House. They were closing down their tap house. It's one of the most iconic beer bars within our generation. And unfortunately, they, through a number of different reasons, decided to close down the tap house. And we had a chance to talk to them right before they closed. And so, hearing the emotion coming from him about all that he's given to this industry and what he's done for this industry and what he's going to miss from it was pretty raw and pretty impactful. And we're just grateful to get a chance to hear that story.
All right. So I'm kind of curious here, because you've been talking about a lot of the interviews and everything you've done. Talk to us a little bit about what actually got you into craft beer. What really flipped that switch? I know we all pretty much kind of have that kind of story. So I'm kind of curious what yours is.
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty interesting. So I'm originally from Kentucky, and I moved out to Colorado, I think, probably 13 years ago. But, in college, I was pretty uninitiated at the time when it came to beer. And I still very distinctly remember my freshman year kind of hallmate. He lived catty corner to my room. I saw him leaving the dorm at 9 p.m. on like a Monday or Tuesday with a backpack on. And I was like, dude, what are you doing right now? And he's like, I'm getting on the bus to go to the liquor store. And I was like, what? And I won't name any names because he was definitely not of age. But I guess at the time there was a liquor store that did serve to underage folks. And he was like, I'm going to go get some beer. I was like, what are you going to get? What are you going to get? And he was like, I'm going to go get a 6-pack of Edmund Fitzgerald from Great Lakes. Nice. And I was like, dang, dude, you are like an old man in a young person's body. But, that was a very memorable experience. And also, oddly enough, growing up in Lexington, Kentucky, we had easy access to Kentucky Ale bourbon barrels. So when I was 21, at the time, Kentucky Ale was a much different tasting beer. And the rumor was that they had access to Pappy Van Winkle barrels for the longest time. And so I don't know if that's true, but in my kind of memory of it, I like to romanticize the idea of Kentucky Ale being aged in Pappy barrels in their early years. But oddly enough, a bourbon barrel-aged beer was one of my gateway beers to craft beer. When I moved to Colorado, I moved out here for AmeriCorps. So I was working with the Boys and Girls Clubs up in Fort Collins. And at the time, when you're an AmeriCorps member, you're paid less than minimum wage so that you can better understand the communities that you're serving. And at the time, all that we could afford on the weekends was to visit breweries like New Belgium and Odell that still offered free tasters at the time. And we would sit there for a couple hours each weekend and talk to the bartenders and hear about how collaborative and communal the craft beer industry was. And it was unlike anything I had ever heard of. Growing up, it was very traditional in kind of the jobs that were available to us. And so to hear about, New Belgium running out of hops and calling up their friends at Odell down the street and getting a pallet delivered to them within 30 minutes was unheard of. And so I was like, hey, I want to figure out how I can become part of this industry. I want to give back to this incredible industry that's giving to other people.
It's an interesting route you took, and shout out for being an AmeriCorps member. I did that myself back in '99 in Washington, D.C. So love hearing that. Cool. You don't run into a lot of alumni, at least in my neck of the woods, that often. So what took you to basically journalism for the craft beer scene? Did you try to go into brewing, working at a brewery, anything like that beforehand?
No, it was actually very much a different route. I think. So I was a journalism major in college, and I've always loved writing. I've always loved storytelling. And when I fell in love with this industry, during that time, during my AmeriCorps years, I knew I was like, hey, I want to get involved in the craft beer industry, but I knew that I didn't have the scientific background or the patience of time and kind of the precision that is required to brew really tremendous beer. Obviously, I'd done some home brewing with friends for a little while, and none of the beers that we made tasted anywhere close to as good as the beers that we could buy. So I knew that my version of getting involved in this industry had to be something outside of brewing. And so, I looked to where my skills were, and writing kind of scratched that itch, so to speak. And so, when it came to launching Porchdrinking, I really reached out to about 20 different friends, both from college and through people that I had met out in Colorado, and said, hey, would you be interested in going on this crazy ride with me? We very much wanted to start small and make sure that we had at least one post a day, Monday through Friday. And we wanted to keep it fun. And I think folks really enjoyed the approach that we took towards beer writing. And that's kind of how we slowly grew our numbers and slowly grew our presence within this industry.
So I got to ask, because you brought up the home brewing, what were you doing? Were you doing, what is it called, the Mr. Beer that Ken brings up all the time? Were you using, what were you using? Were you doing all grain?
It was totally extract. It was probably a Mr. Beer kit. It was my roommate at the time, who coincidentally enough was the guy who was buying Edmund Fitzgerald back in college. Him and I and another buddy from college all brewed together. And we did switch to all grain eventually, but it was definitely extract to start, and it tasted horribly. I think it was the first couple times was probably because we didn't have our temperatures correct. We didn't we weren't too. I think there were definitely a lot of those brew days where drinking beers that we bought at the store were a greater priority than actually producing the beers that we were making, and so. Obviously the results reflected it. So
I love it. Yeah, I've been a home brewer, so I know exactly those early batches especially can be bad if you don't know what you're doing. I'll tell you what though, moving to mead, if you ever give a chance, that's what I've been doing. It's wonderful. So if you ever decide to, definitely give it a try. Let's talk about you living in Denver. So you moved out there. You moved to basically, at least I figure, is the mecca of craft beer in America. We brought it up before, you've got Phoenix, where I'm at, LA, two major cities that just don't have a third of the craft beer scene that a place like Denver has. What's it like living there? Was it kind of overwhelming when you first got into this with the number of choices, or what was it like?
It really wasn't that overwhelming, because you got to realize, you got to remember that the scene, both here and nationally, about 12, 13 years ago was much different than the one that we're seeing now. I think at the time, Denver had under 30 breweries. Now we've got, I think Colorado Colorado Beer Geek, Steven Adams, just did a year in review by the numbers, and the state of Colorado alone has over 400 breweries. So, it's definitely evolved over time. I remember moving from Fort Collins to Denver. At the time, we had Great Divide, Strange Craft Beer, Bull and Bush, Renegade, and really kind of the trio of Great Divide, Strange Craft, and Renegade were very instrumental to our craft beer discovery early on. I also had the benefit of a friend from college working for Avery Brewing back in the alley days, and us getting the opportunity to go volunteer at their beer festivals when they had Strong Ale Fest. I think they also had an IPA fest and their anniversary parties. And so we would volunteer at all those events. We had an opportunity to try Pliny the Younger back when, nowhere else in the state got that beer. So we were, a lot of things happened in the right way that we got to experience the industry very firsthand. at the impetus of the craft beer explosion that we've seen over the past decade.
Yeah, that's a great story because you really did get to see it explode to what it is now. Which had to be amazing just to watch that grow. I know we saw that back in my days in Michigan too. It was really going on back, especially when we first started this. I'm glad you invoked Great Divide. Yeti, probably one of my favorite stouts out there that you can actually get. Talk to us about some of your favorite styles. I know you mentioned the West Coast IPA. What are some of your other favorite styles that you like to drink?
You broke up there for a second. What was the question again?
Sorry. So I know you mentioned West Coast IPAs as something that you prefer, but what are some of the other styles of beer you prefer to drink?
Oh yeah, I'm very much a lager drinker these days. Unfortunately, as I've gotten older with age, my tastes have shifted. Where I used to be someone who chased sour and wilds and barrel aged stouts. Unfortunately, I can't handle those as easily nowadays. So I'm very much a lager drinker. We also benefit from the good fortune of being right down the street from Bierstadt Lager House, which is one of the best lager producers in the country, if not the world. And so we have super great access there. I've also been drinking a lot of Amalgam Brewing. They're a small kind of very small, unique brewing model in that, they brew their work at other breweries like Bierstadt, and then they do a lot of barrel-aged beers, but they have also been brewing a lot of great lagers. So this one that I'm going to be drinking later on is a West Coast India Pale Ale that they did in collaboration with Green Cheek Beer out of California. And Amalgam has just been doing some of the best stuff here in Colorado. I've also been a big fan of Westbound and Down. They work really closely with Amalgam as well. And they kind of run the gamut in terms of barrel-aged stouts. They brewed a really tremendous English mild this year. They've done a lot of collaborations. They have a Western Conference All-Stars that showcases collaborations with some of the best West Coast IPA producers in the country. And then their lagers are absolutely tremendous as well. So those are just a couple that I'm drinking at the moment.
Excellent. All right, Rob, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All righty. So I just saw that I was messing around on Facebook here. Saw that you guys had the 10th anniversary Porchdrinking Beer Festival that was back in October. I was curious to kind of talk to us about the festival and how, according to the post, basically how it serves as the pregame to the GABF.
Yeah, totally. Well, obviously, it was our first time throwing a significant size beer festival. And so, we wanted to do something that helped to commemorate our 10-year anniversary, but also helped us to kind of kickstart funding for our mental health fund. One of the things that over the past 10 years we've noticed about this industry is that not enough conversation goes towards mental health within the craft beer industry. A lot of friends of ours, unfortunately, have suffered from addiction, substance abuse and alcohol, and in some cases suicide. And so we wanted to do something about it, and we're working on doing something about it in terms of starting this mental health fund that will eventually give opportunities for people to receive free therapy sessions who work for the people who work for the craft beer industry. And so, a lot of the funds that we generated from our 10-year anniversary beer festival went to support this mental health fund. And also, with GABF being in our backyard, we said, why not? There's always been a tremendous amount of programming outside of the festival that happens that week of GABF. Why not join kind of the fun and all the excitement that happens during GABF week, and especially when brewers and breweries are already in town for that fest, to piggyback off of that and launch a beer festival of our own. One of the things that we were super intentional about, we had a code of conduct, especially after all the stuff that was really shown a light on through the Rat Magnet posts from last year. We wanted to make sure that we created a safe and welcoming environment for all attendees. As someone who attended a lot of beer festivals, throughout the past 10 years. That was really important to me, but also making sure that our brewers had the best experience possible. So we had a brewer's lounge where we supplied a bunch of food. We had a bottle share going on in the brewer's lounge. We also had some spirits from our spirit sponsors, and also an after party for our brewers as well, so that they didn't just come to the festival and feel like they were just there to pour beers for 3 hours and then go home. We wanted them to truly enjoy the experience and feel like they were part of it. And then also we did everything that we could to really showcase those breweries. We provided, tablecloth, tables already provided to make sure some of the elements that, breweries dread having to bring all their stuff, we could at least provide some of that so that they didn't have to feel like it was a chore. Because I definitely, in working for breweries, that's something that I know very well firsthand.
Right. Now, I feel like, when you're from Kentucky, there's always that little stereotype that kind of goes with people who are from Kentucky, that they are naturally bourbon drinkers. So I am curious if there are any bourbons that having, been from there, that there are any that you enjoy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm a big bourbon drinker as well. Being from Kentucky, I feel like that is part of our DNA. But I definitely love I love the Buffalo Trace collection in terms of like Eagle Rare. Actually, my dog is named Weller, so that's a nice little homage to my Kentucky roots. But out here in Colorado, we've also got a burgeoning, whiskey scene as well. Two of my clients are whiskey producers, Law's Whiskey House and the Block Distilling, which I actually have a bottle of right here. It's one of the more beautiful bottles that I feel like I've seen.
Nice bottle.
Industry.
It's toured Law's on my last trip there.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, Law's is tremendous. They've been around for quite some time now, and they've done a really killer job, and same with the Block. They're newer kids on the block, but they definitely produce some really killer stuff.
Now, and that kind of leads me into my question about spirits and how there is always this kind of a competition for market share when it comes to spirits and with beer. In terms of beer, do you feel like beer is in a position where it's gaining market share, losing, or is it holding position? And I guess in your opinion, how do you think beer is doing against spirits?
That's an interesting question. I'll be fully transparent in the fact that I am not probably the best in terms of data, but just from what I've seen through Bart Watson, the chief economist of the Brewers Guild, and also just from anecdotal data from some of my clients, I think it's a little bit of a waxing and waning kind of element. I think things come in different cycles, and obviously we saw the huge seltzer wave that took over the industry a couple of years back. It seems like seltzer is not having as much success these days. We're seeing ready-to-drink cocktails gaining a lot of momentum. So I think the spirits world is definitely benefiting from that kind of trend right now. But I think craft beer is going to be, I think they've sustained. They've definitely not seen, when they have decreased, it's not been one significantly enough that has deterred this industry to lose market share significantly enough. I think there's a truth to the fact that we're now over 9,000 breweries in the country, and I think that's for a reason. I think the interest and thirst for craft beer is still there, but I think along with that evolutionary cycle, I think there's also an evolution of taste profiles. Even from some of the best barrel-aged stout producers here in Colorado, I've heard just anecdotally that those sales have declined significantly as a category over the past few years, because I think there's just been a proliferation of breweries that have started doing that style. And I think people are moving away from heavily adjuncted barrel-aged stouts to cleaner, more traditional styles. And I think that speaks to, the general evolution of a craft beer drinker's taste in general. I know that when I first started out, I was super into hobby beers and wanting to discover this everything that I could discover in terms of hops. That quickly changed to wanting to try sour beers and barrel aged stouts and big barrel aged beers in general. And now, I've evolved my taste to go back to easy drinking lagers, West Coast IPAs, and just generally more traditional styles as a whole. And I think as beer drinkers kind of mature, I think they most likely have also matured in their taste profiles and kind of gone through their own different cycles. Not saying that it's necessarily the same as mine, but I think that people develop different kind of preferences over time when it comes to the diversity of flavors that are available to them.
Yeah. Now, I guess my last one here before we get to, I think we're going to go back to Ken on this. I did see that you've been a marketing manager for Drizzly. And I saw that, and we don't have Drizzly here in Michigan, and clearly it does work in other states. Obviously, it's in Colorado. I think it's in California. But from your perspective, I mean, we have ways where we can have alcohol delivered, but I guess, do you see Drizzly being something that is just nationwide at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think technology has evolved to the point where American consumers want everything at their fingertips, and as especially during the pandemic, with as ubiquitous as restaurant delivery has become, grocery delivery has become. I absolutely think that alcohol delivery is something that I'm surprised hasn't become fully national to the extent that I would have predicted. But I think in terms of ease, it's helpful, but also I definitely think that it's helpful in terms of not allowing folks or dissuading folks from leaving their houses after they have been drinking, or leaving a party after they've been drinking to go out and buy some more. Instead of doing that, they can have it delivered to their houses and not have to drink and drive if they want to keep the party going. So, I think that there is, obviously, with any situation, there's going to be any situation where alcohol is involved. There's going to be risks, and there's going to be deterrence. But I think that responsibility falls on the drinker, no matter what is available to them. And so I think having the convenience of alcohol delivery can be more of a positive than a negative in many cases.
Let's see. Ken, take over here.
Well, you did enter into our territory of the craft beer world, and that is your podcast. Talk to us a little bit more about Porchdrinking and the Porchcast, and what was the idea behind starting the actual podcast itself a couple years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think much like you guys, we love the idea of just being able to talk to people more candidly. I think, for a variety of reasons, I think journalism has received a bad rap over the years, and it's unfortunate, because as someone who's a diehard journalism head, a journalism fan, I feel like most journalists, I'd say 95% of the journalists out there, are more critical of their own industry than the rest of the world. And so but I think there is, in many cases, I have come across breweries that I've interviewed where they've been very apprehensive or a little bit more guarded in some of their responses. Whereas when we're able to just sit down and have a conversation with them, either face to face or through Zoom, we're able to talk more candidly and be able to hang out just like we'd be hanging out in person. And so I think these conversations give the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the folks that we're talking to, and it allows them to feel a little bit more at home. And it also gives people, our listeners, an opportunity to kind of feel more connected to the folks that we're talking to. And so, I think in any situation when I talk about marketing or about journalism, it's about the people. It's not about the product. It's about the people first. And I think people relate to other people, that people relate to those kind of conversations. And so I think podcast is such a tremendous venue for those kind of exchanges.
Now you mentioned that when you started porchdrinking.com, you were kind of looking for a version of Grantland for the craft beer and the beer industry. I assume you mean that because you follow sports. What sports do you follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a Kentuckian through and through, Kentucky basketball and now Kentucky football are, probably bigger interest than craft beer itself. I talk about, it's interesting. I don't think people truly understand the kind of, or just how big of a role Kentucky sports plays in the lives of Kentuckians. First and foremost, we don't have any professional sports teams in the state of Kentucky. So when it comes to people who enjoy sports and want to gravitate towards a particular sports team, we really do only have our college athletics. And so and I think that the fact that the program has been so successful for so many years is definitely something that has been a point of pride for Kentuckians. I was lucky enough to be in a middle class family, but I've seen a lot of poverty in the state of Kentucky, and I think there's not a lot that Kentuckians have historically had a lot of pride around. And so I think the fact that Kentucky basketball has been such a point of pride has united the state and brought this fan base together into something that goes beyond just it being a sports game. It's truly a way of life. It's something that folks can connect with. It's something that people can talk about on a day-to-day basis, and it's something that they can puff out their chests a little bit to the rest of the country and say, like, hey, we're one of the best in the country at doing this particular sport. And so I think it's pretty cool to see that kind of community come together for something like that. And I think that's something that for me personally, throughout my struggles early on in trying to figure out what I wanted to do career wise, that's been a constant for me is having Kentucky, this community of Kentucky fans that get together and watch all the games, and when we're lucky, get to attend some of the games in person. So sports is definitely something that I'm very much passionate about and interested in.
All right. Well, as we end every single show, we have the final questions and then give you the opportunity to kind of tell everyone where they can find Porch Drinking. So I will start with Wendy. Wendy, what is your final question for Tristan over here?
So I have had the opportunity the last couple of years to do 2 different visits to Colorado. So I'm just curious as to what your favorite brewery is that people have not heard of in Colorado.
I think I mentioned Amalgam, but they don't have a tasting room. They would be my favorite brewery as a whole in the state of Colorado that people haven't heard of. But the other one that I'd say is a little bit more accessible is probably Novel Strand. They're a newer brewery here in Denver. They're located on South Broadway, and the husband and wife team, Tamir and Chantel. They're doing incredible stuff. They have a small, cozy tasting room, but they have done some really exciting hoppy beers that is really pushing the boundaries on innovation. They recently created a fermented tea beverage that really is indescribable, except for the fact that I would say if people have maybe had kind of cold tea drinks in Asia, it's very reminiscent of that. They used like a lychee fruit to help fruit the tea drink. They do some great wild fermented beers. They also do some great stouts. They really are very diverse in their offerings, but I think their hoppy beers and their lagers are probably the most prolific. And I'm always excited to see what they're cranking out from an innovation standpoint.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Daniel, what's your final question?
All right. One quick comment real quick. You might not have professional sports in Kentucky, but there's this little race that goes on every May that really does draw more people than most sporting events across the country that people tend to forget about. anyways, we talked about your favorite style of beer. What's your least favorite style of beer and why?
Oof. Man. I'm gonna get a little bit of flack for this. Actually, you know what? No. I think milk lactose beers. I think those are, I was gonna say smoked beers, but I do actually enjoy a few smoked beers. I just don't like the ones that taste like barbecued meat. But I would say
it's lactose. An acquired taste.
Yeah, all of those like smoothie lactose IPAs or just smoothie drinks in general, like it's just,
amen.
I'm like,
yes,
you might as well just go get a smoothie and spike it with like whatever liquor that you want. I mean, I don't understand wanting to throw lactose into everything. It just, it's too much, too sweet.
I agree. Milk and pine sol is a really bad combination. So I don't know who decided to come up with that. Hopefully it goes away sometime.
It's funny. I've never really thought about this until just now, but in Chinese culture, there's a joke that like our whenever you're eating a dessert or you're serving a dessert to your parents, your Asian parents, the best kind of compliment that you can get from a parent is not too sweet. And so I think that translates to me of when I'm drinking a beer, if it's too sweet, I'm like, nah, get out of here.
All right.
Dan, I assume you're talking about, of course, the Land Between the Lakes Trail Runs 50-mile race that happens every year in Kentucky.
That's it exactly. You figured it out.
Rob, what's your final question?
Oh, my final questions have a tendency to not mess with beer for some reason. So if I have this correctly, if I do have this correctly, that you attended Miami University from 2005 to 2009?
Yeah, correct.
So as you could
Ohio?
Yes, Miami, Ohio. That's
Miami University, not the University of Miami.
Yeah. If I was going that way, I would have said the U, but we know the difference.
The U, correct.
Right. We know the difference. But obviously, with some of the things that you see in my background here, I'm kind of curious if there was any crazy parties or hangovers that kind of went on around the time of 2006 when former Miami quarterback Ben Roethlisberger won Super Bowl 40.
Oh man, you're not gonna like what I have to say about this, but
I'm probably not, because there's love or hate for Steelers, so go for it.
I'm not even anti-Steeler. I am anti-Ben Roethlisberger, and this comes from a personal interaction. I'll just say this.
Oh, give me this. I want to hear this.
I'll say that I think he came back to our campus when we were retiring his jersey. And, around that time, there had already been a lot of, stuff swirling around, some of his past transgressions with women. And I'll say firsthand that I witnessed the kind of character that he has on that front. I think we were at a bar uptown when Ben Roethlisberger rolled in with his posse. He was wearing a hoodie over his head the entire time, and his posse kind of surrounded him in a corner so that everyone else at the bar could not have access to him, which is understandable. Like as someone who's as big of a star as he was, I understand not wanting to be mobbed by people. But
right.
The one aspect that I was not particularly fond of was the fact that throughout the night, he would randomly just grab girls into this little corner that he had and just grind on them without their permission. And several of my friends being, recipients of the unwanted grinding. And so it just didn't leave the best perspective of who he was as an alumni. And I'll just say I'm not the biggest supporter of him because of it.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised.
All right. I will finish with two final questions. One is trivia about porch drinking. So I need you to think really, really hard, because I scoured your website to find your very first 1-minute beer review. Do you remember what your first 1-minute beer review is on your website, Porch Drinking? And I'll give you the biggest hint, or a hint. It was a Michigan beer.
Oh, man. Michigan beer. It had to be... Man, this is hard. I don't know. Was it something from New Holland?
It was not.
Oh wow.
I'll go one more hint further. It was something from Bell's.
Oh dang. Was it? It couldn't have been. It wasn't Oberon, was it?
It was not Oberon. No.
Okay. Two Hearted?
It was not Two Hearted. The beer you drank was Bell's Brewing's Special Double Cream Stout.
Wow, that's insane.
It was the very first 1-minute beer review on your website.
I will say I do remember the very first beer showcase that we had on our site, and that was Blue Paddle from New Belgium Brewing.
I didn't go that far. I just looked for posts by you, so that was.
Well, I'm saying my very first beer showcase or beer review, in general, not a 1-minute beer review, was new Blue Paddle from New Belgium, which unfortunately is no longer in production.
And my final question before you tell us where they can find Porch Drinking on all over the internet. Tomorrow, Kentucky plays Iowa in the Music City Bowl. What is the final score?
I think it's going to be one of the lowest scoring games that throughout all of the bowl seasons. So I'm going to go 10-6 Kentucky.
All right, a barn burner of defensive plays, 10-6. Porch Drinking, where can they find website, social media, all that fun stuff? Oh, no, he cut out. Oh, there he is. Porch Drinking, where can they find... there we go. We got it.
Porchdrinking.com on the... Yep. Porchdrinking.com, and if you're checking us out on social media, it's at PorchDrinkingCO on Instagram. I believe at PorchDrinkingCO on Twitter as well. But yeah, check us out on all of our social media channels. Check us out on our podcast. And a big thank you to all that you guys do to help our industry as well.
Thank you so much. That's going to do it for this episode of Better on Draft. No matter what you think of your beer, we think it's Better on Draft. Have a good night.
Merry New Year. Peace.